That yellow warning light on the dash of your customer's car, you know, the one with the exclamation point in the middle of it? Well, that's for the tire pressure monitoring system, and it's a lot more than just an annoyance to your customer. It's a vital safety system, and making sure that it stays working the way it's supposed to is the subject of this edition of The Trainer. The tire pressure monitoring system is a safety system that's been mandated for quite a while now. The purpose of the system is to let the driver of the vehicle know when one of his tires has become severely underinflated. And that's a good thing, because underinflated tires don't handle properly, they run hotter, and they're more subject to catastrophic failure than tires that are kept at the correct inflation pressure. And as technicians, if you're checking the tire pressure in every vehicle that comes into your shop, you know that the majority of cars that do come in have at least one tire that isn't inflated to the correct pressure. Now, to understand how to properly service and repair TPMS, you have to understand the basics of how they work. Initial TPMS systems use a method called indirect TPMS. They already had the wheel speed sensors in place as part of the anti-lock brake and traction control systems. So what they did was they created an algorithm and put that into the software so that the computer, judging by the wheel speed of the 4 different tires, could determine when one tire was underinflated. It couldn't tell you exactly what the pressure was, just that one that wasn't the way it was supposed to be. Now, they had to learn the baseline first before it could determine when one was bad. That was usually done by putting the vehicle into learn mode, setting the tires to the correct pressures, and then driving it until the vehicle learned what normal was. The drawback of the system: if you put it into learn mode without properly inflating the tires, you had a problem. Most cars on the road today, though, use the more modern direct system of TPMS. And what that means is there's actually a sensor in each wheel that physically sends a signal to the controlling module reporting on the pressure and temperature of that individual tire. Now, there's a couple of different types of direct sensors that you're going to run into. One of the first that was out was called the band sensor. This was literally attached to the center line of the wheel using a very large hose clamp. Typically you'll find these sensors mounted 180 degrees opposite of a conventional rubber valve stem. It's mounted there to help protect that sensor from damage during normal tire and wheel service. You know, when you're breaking the bead, you don't want to take that sensor out with it. The next type of sensor that came along was the clamp-in sensor. Now, the clamp-in sensor is the one you recognize that has the metal stem that's held down tight with a lock nut. I shouldn't say tight, there's very little torque on these, and that's one thing you want to make sure your shop has, is the proper service equipment for applying the right torque values to not only the lock nut, but that delicate Schrader valve that's located inside that stem. The third type is the snap-in. Now, that's what looks to be a conventional rubber valve stem, but on the other end of it, you're going to find a sensor attached with a screw. Again, there's a specific torque value, very, very low, for that screw and that attachment point. And both of the latter two put the sensor right there up by the bead area of the tire. So you really take some extra precautions to make sure that you know whether or not there's a TPMS sensor in that wheel. And when you do break the wheel down, make sure you do it in a manner that's not going to damage that sensor. Now, the servicing and repair of TPMS starts with a pre-check of the car. In other words, let's make sure the system doesn't have any problems before we even start any work on it. And that should apply to any car that's coming in for tire service, whether it's to fix a flat, rotate the tires, or even install brand new tires. You want to make sure that your customer didn't come in with a problem already. You want to make sure the system even has a TPMS system in it. So the very first thing to do is to turn the key on, and while you look at the bulb check, look for that TPMS telltale light to come on and go off. If you bring the car into the bay and the light's still on, typically that means there's a low tire, but not always. There could be some other things causing that. And if it's blinking, that means there's a code set in the system that you're going to need to retrieve and determine the reason for. Again, do all this as soon as you bring the car in to make sure that it doesn't have any problems. Once you have the car inside, do a sensor check using a capable scan tool like this PreCheck 500. I want to know if any of the batteries are getting weak. A lot of these cars are getting old now. They were forecasting maybe a 10-year lifespan on the batteries that are included in the sensor, incorporated in the sensor. Some of those are going to be wearing out. So I may have a system on the car that's getting low or has already failed, requiring sensor replacement. So it's a good time to tell your customer right before you start any kind of tire work, so they can't come back to you later and say, it wasn't broke when I brought it to you. Again, if the warning light on the dash is illuminated and it's steady when you bring the car in, usually means that one of the tires is low. Question is, which one? Now, some models will just let you know that a tire is low, so you have to go and check them all anyway. Others will tell you exactly which tire that it is. And on some, the spare is included. So that could be the one that's low and sending a signal to the module to turn the light on. In either case, we don't know if the modules are reporting from the right place. Maybe the person who rotated it last didn't relearn the system like they were supposed to, so the report we're getting for a left front being low could actually be the right rear. So what we're going to do is use the Bartec 500, start it up and enter the vehicle information, and do what they call a test before you touch run through on this vehicle. We'll select that, the model. And the year. And then we'll follow the prompts on our tool. Now on this one I can see this has one of the metal clamped valve stems held in place with that locking sleeve. So I know where that sensor is located. If it was a rubber stem, it could be a toss-up, whether it's located here as part of a snap-in assembly or a banded sensor. Typically banded sensors are used on Ford, some GM products, not on the Chryslers. So I'm going to place my tool where I know the sensor to be, right next to the tire, and hit test. It'll run through the protocols, get information from the sensor, and then it'll give me a report. It gives me the sensor ID number, the amount of air in the tire, and the tire battery life and temperature of the tire. So I can save all that, do it for all 4 tires. And once I've completed all the tires, most scan tools or TPMS tools like this one will save that data. I can scroll through and check the pressures. I can check the temperatures and codes. And I can save that information, even print it out to keep that with my customer records. That way, if I do find a problem, again, right before I start, everybody knows, and it's going to be up to the customer to decide what they want to do about it. Now, activating the sensors and reading the tire pressures with any TPMS tools, that's usually the easy part. Anyone can do that, and that tends to be one of the trip-up points for a lot of techs. It's because it's a routine thing to do when it comes to actually learning the system for new replacement TPMS sensors, or just from simply performing a tire rotation. They try to follow that same cookie-cutter approach with mixed results. A lot of different ways now that vehicles are put into learn mode and how they are learned. Now, most domestics, like this Chrysler, will have a specified procedure in the service information system for putting it in the learn mode. Then the sensors are activated in order, beginning with the left front. Typically, you'll hear a horn chirp when the vehicle has recognized that that has been learned, and you do that for all the tires. That goes ahead and tells the system where those new tires or where those sensors are now located, and now it's going to work the way it's supposed to. A lot of Asian vehicles, though, and I think some Europeans, they don't work that way. You actually have to record the IDs of the sensors and then tell the computer where those sensors are located. And you do that by using a capable TPMS tool or scan tool and literally writing the IDs through the DLC connector. Okay, generally the rewrite procedure on most vehicles that require that is pretty straightforward. You're going to go around with your tool, you're going to collect the IDs of the sensors that are in place. If you happen to use an aftermarket programmable sensor, make sure you programmed it before you install it in the tire. Get the IDs that we need, connect to the OBD2, follow the on-screen prompts. In this case, we're going to turn the key on, hit enter, and let the tool do its thing. See, no time at all. And now we know for sure that the car knows where these sensors are and the system's going to work the way it is. This also performed a DTC check to make sure there weren't any other problems in the system that we didn't already know about. Like any other system on today's cars, with the right training and the right tools and the right information, servicing and repairing TPMS systems need not be all that difficult. If you are shopping for a new TPMS scan tool, TPMS tool, consider a few features that you should absolutely have. Of course, it has to be able to activate and read the sensor information. That's a given, and nearly any TPMS tool in the market will do that. The more capable scan tools also now allow for the connection to the DLC so that you can write that information to the control module on those vehicles requiring that as part of the learn process. In addition to that, they should also be able to read any related DTCs that are stored in the system, at least in the TPMS system, so that you're not caught off guard by a problem that pops up a little later on. You'll also find that many of them are able to test remote keyless entry key fobs and even the passive entry systems for their signals to make sure they're working. Why? Because some cars require the operation of the key fob to put it into learn mode. Now, not only do you need a good TPMS tool, you also need the service tools for the TPMS valves and sensor assemblies, especially the clamp-in and the snap-in type, because these are attached to the sensor with very small fasteners that require very little torque. It's very easy to damage even a brand new one by over-torquing the component and damaging the assembly. So you want to make sure that you do that right. You also want to make sure that whenever you're servicing a clamped-in type of system, when you take that stem out of the wheel assembly, make sure you replace the rubber seals and the locking sleeve at a bare minimum to make sure that that sensor doesn't fail or develop a leak that's going to cause a problem for the customer down the road. After all, you replace conventional rubber stems, don't you? Well, that's about do it for this edition of The Trainer. I'm Pete Meyer, Motor Age Magazine. I'll see you next month.